What if I told you that you are both watching this video and not watching this video? And what if I told you that both of those statements are completely, factually true? It sounds impossible, right? Our world is built on a simple, seemingly unbreakable rule. Something can't be true and false at the same time. A light switch is either on or it is off. You're either here or you're not. This is the foundation of all logic, all science, all sanity. But what if there was a philosophy so radical, so utterly chaotic, that it decided to just burn that rule to the ground? An idea so dangerous, it had to be buried and ignored for centuries, because to truly accept it would be to accept the end of meaning itself. This isn't just some abstract thought experiment. It has a name: trivialism. It's the philosophical theory that all statements are true. Every single one. Not just the sensible ones, like the sky is blue, but also their opposites. The sky is not blue. Not just simple facts, but every wild, contradictory, and absurd thing you could possibly imagine. It's a concept that, for most philosophers, is so profoundly self-destructive that it's seen as the complete opposite of skepticism. While a skeptic questions if we can know anything for certain, a trivialist says we know everything for certain because everything is true. To understand just how wild this idea is, we have to go back to the bedrock of Western thought, Aristotle. Over 2,000 years ago, he laid down what's known as the law of non-contradiction. It's the simple but powerful principle that contradictory statements can't both be true in the same sense at the same time. A statement, let's call it P, cannot be both true and false. This is the rule that keeps our world from dissolving into pure nonsense. It's why we can build bridges that don't collapse, write computer code that actually works, and have conversations that lead to understanding instead of just ... noise. It's the silent agreement that holds reality together. Trivialism looks at that foundational agreement and basically says, nah, I'm good. It proposes a world where every contradiction is true, where everything you can say or think is a fact. For centuries, this idea was treated like a logical boogeyman, a monster lurking at the very edge of reason. But why? What's the story of this forbidden thought? And what happens if we actually dare to take it seriously? The history of trivialism isn't like other philosophies. You won't find a famous school dedicated to its study or statues of its founders. It's more of a shadow that has haunted logic since the very beginning. Philosophers didn't champion trivialism. They whispered about it as a catastrophic failure, the intellectual abyss they had to avoid at all costs. In fact, Aristotle himself seems to have come up with his law of non-contradiction, specifically to fight against the kind of thinking trivialism embodies. He was pushing back against early Greek philosophers like Heraclitus and Anaxagoras. Anaxagoras, for instance, is said to have claimed that all things are one, suggesting that in some primordial state, no single quality could be applied to a thing more than its opposite. Heraclitus believed in a union of opposites, the idea that everything is inherently contradictory. Aristotle saw this as a highway to intellectual ruin. He argued that if you believed everything was both true and untrue, you couldn't genuinely act or make a choice. How can you decide to walk to the store if you believe you are both already there and not there simultaneously? For Aristotle, and for most philosophers who came after him, trivialism wasn't a serious position, but a reductio ad absurdum, a ridiculous conclusion used to prove how important non-contradiction really is. So for centuries, trivialism just lay dormant, a buried idea. It was the monster you showed to philosophy students to scare them into respecting the rules of logic. It was the ultimate example of an incoherent worldview. But in the 20th and 21st centuries, something weird happened. As logicians started poking at the limits of their own systems, especially with the development of paraconsistent logics that can handle contradictions without completely breaking down, the ghost of trivialism started to stir. Philosophers began to ask a new question. What if we can't just dismiss trivialism on purely logical grounds? Modern thinkers, like the Australian philosopher Paul Cabet, didn't necessarily come out as true believers, but they took on the challenge of trying to defend it. In his book, A Defense of Trivialism, Cabet argued that while no major philosopher explicitly called themselves a trivialist, figures like Spinoza and Hegel, who famously stated that everything is inherently contradictory, had views that got remarkably close. Cabet's work forced the philosophical world to stop just gawking at the idea and actually tried to argue against it, which turned out to be surprisingly difficult. So how would this even work? How can a sane person look at the world and say that dogs can fly and dogs cannot fly are both equally true? The trivialist has a simple, if mind-bending, answer. The universe is just that accommodating. In the world of trivialism, truth isn't some scarce resource reserved for things that match reality. It's an infinite, abundant property of every single proposition you can think of. Let's imagine you're trying to have a simple conversation with a committed trivialist. You say, "It's a sunny day." The trivialist replies, "That is true." You continue, "Wait, look, clouds are rolling in. It's actually a cloudy day now." The trivialist replies, "That is also true." Confused, you say, "It can't be both sunny and cloudy." The trivialist, with perfect calmness, would say, "But it is." And your statement that it can't be both is also true. This is where our brains start to short circuit. We're trying to play a game with rules, the rules of logic, evidence, and reason, while the trivialist is playing a game with no rules at all. Or rather, they have only one rule. Everybody wins. Every statement is correct. Every idea is a fact. To a trivialist, our whole system of knowledge is based on a false premise, that only some things are true. They see this as a needlessly complicated problem. Think of all the energy humanity has spent on science, debate, and investigation, all just to separate what's true from what's false. The trivialist just bypasses all of it by accepting everything. Why does the world appear to be designed? Because trivialism is true, and one of the infinite true propositions is the world is designed. Why does the world appear to be the product of random chance? Because trivialism is true, and the world is the product of random chance is also a true proposition. For every single question, trivialism has the same answer. Yes, and no, and both, and neither. On the surface, this might all seem like a harmless, if bizarre, philosophical game. So what if a few thinkers entertain an idea that feels like a glitch in reality? But the reason this idea was buried and feared for so long is because of what it would mean for us. The danger of trivialism isn't that it's wrong. The danger is that if it were right, everything we value as a civilization would be rendered completely meaningless. Think about it. Science is a process of elimination. We test hypotheses to see if they're wrong, so we can get closer to what's right. But if this drug cures cancer, and this drug does not cure cancer, are both true, then medical research is pointless. The entire scientific method collapses into a heap of contradictory and therefore useless information. Our justice systems are built on figuring out the truth. Did the defendant commit the crime or not? For a trivialist, the answer is yes. They are both guilty and innocent. The very concepts of justice, fairness, and accountability just evaporate. If every action is simultaneously right and wrong, then morality itself is a fiction. Even our most basic communication would shatter. Language works because we agree that words mean something and point to a specific truth. If I tell you, "There's a fire in the building, you need to get out," that statement is useful only because its opposite, "There is no fire," is assumed to be false. If both are true, my warning is no different from a random string of sounds. It carries no information. It doesn't compel you to do anything. As the philosopher Graham Priest pointed out, A true trivialist can't even act with purpose. You can't decide to do something to achieve a goal if you also believe that goal is already achieved. This is the real danger of trivialism. It's not just an idea, it's an anti-idea. It is the universal acid that dissolves not just truth, but also meaning, purpose, and trust. If everything is true, then the word truth becomes worthless. It's like a currency where every coin is worth exactly the same. Nothing. A world governed by trivialism would be a world of total paralysis and silence, where nothing is worth saying because everything and its opposite has already been said and is already true. So, is trivialism just a philosophical dead end? A weird artifact of logic that was buried for a very good reason? For the most part, yeah. It remains on the absolute fringes of thought, rejected by pretty much everyone. But its ghost still serves a vital purpose. It forces us to ask why we believe what we believe. In our modern world, we're swimming in a sea of information and misinformation. We see people and ideologies that seem to embrace blatant contradictions, acting as if they can have their own set of facts. This is where the shadow of trivialism looms largest. While it's not a formal philosophy they're following, this behavior flirts with the same chaos. The idea that truth isn't a fixed principle to be discovered, but a mushy concept to be twisted and used. Trivialism is the ultimate expression of this chaos. But there are less extreme, more compelling cousins of this idea, like dialetheism, which argues that some contradictions can be true, but not all of them. Think of paradoxes like the liar's sentence. This sentence is false. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it must be true. Philosophers who lean towards dialetheism look at puzzles like this and suggest that maybe, just maybe, reality is complicated enough to allow for a few rare, true contradictions. Trivialism, in its purest form, remains the boogeyman. It's likely impossible for a human being to truly live as a trivialist. Our minds, our actions, our very survival depend on making distinctions, on believing that the speeding car is here and not there, that the poison is harmful and the antidote is helpful. But the buried idea of trivialism leaves us with a profound and unsettling question. We built our entire world on the belief that some things are true and some things are false. We depend on the law of non-contradiction as if it were a law of physics. But what if it isn't? What if it's just the most convenient, most practical, most sane story we've ever told ourselves to make sense of a universe that is, at its core, far more paradoxical and chaotic than we could ever want to believe? What do you think? Could there be any truth to the idea that contradictions can exist in reality? Or is the law of non-contradiction an absolute, unbreakable rule? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.